My parents recently revealed that they spent my entire wedding fund on my younger sister's failing business, dropping this bombshell just a week before my wedding. Let me give you some context about how we got here. My parents are financially well off, running a successful construction business. My sister and I grew up comfortably, but it was always clear that she was the favored one. Being the youngest and born when my mom was older, she was spoiled from the start. For reference, I'm 29 and my sister, let's call her Lucy, just turned 19 a few months ago. Lucy is the textbook definition of entitled. She's never had to face consequences for her actions or decisions, and she's never been disciplined, unlike me. Growing up, my parents were strict with me, always making sure I stayed on track. With Lucy, however, there were no rules. She spent the past few years letting her grades slide, blowing through our parents' money, and hanging out with her equally aimless friends. Last year, she announced that she didn't want to go to college. Instead, she wanted to start her own business, designing and selling denim apparel. From the start, anyone could see that this was a terrible idea. She has no qualifications, and her designs, if you could call them that, were far from original or marketable. But Lucy was convinced she was a genius, thanks to her friends hyping her up. Despite my warnings, my parents agreed to fund her venture. I told them it was doomed to fail. Lucy wasn't taking advice from anyone and insisted on doing everything her way, even though she had zero experience in running a business. But my concerns fell on deaf ears. My parents went all in, investing heavily in her project. Eventually, I gave up trying to reason with them and avoided the topic altogether whenever we talked. Around the same time, I got engaged to my fiancé. After 5 years together, we were finally planning our wedding. I'd been saving and planning carefully, but my parents had always assured me they'd set aside a wedding fund for me. This wasn't something I felt entitled to. They told me repeatedly over the years that they'd been saving specifically for this. For months, I planned my dream wedding, organizing everything with their promises in mind. They reassured me that I could pay for things up front and they'd reimburse me in one lump sum closer to the wedding date. This arrangement seemed reasonable, and I trusted them completely. So I went all out: a grand venue, an extensive guest list, luxurious catering. It was shaping up to be the wedding I'd always dreamed of. But 3 days ago, just a week before the big day, they dropped the bombshell. There was no wedding fund. None. They'd used all the money to support Lucy's business venture. To say I was blindsided is an understatement. Now I'm scrambling to figure out how to cover the costs of a wedding I've already paid for. If I'd known the truth, I never would have planned such an extravagant event. But instead of celebrating this milestone in my life, I'm left wondering how everything went so horribly wrong. Of course, my fiancé and his family are helping to cover some of the wedding costs, but it's not nearly enough to bridge the gap left by my parents' betrayal. And honestly, we don't feel comfortable asking his parents for more. Unlike mine, they're not wealthy, but they've already contributed as much as they possibly can. It shouldn't be their responsibility to clean up the mess my parents created. We've been paying for so many things out of pocket, believing that my parents would reimburse us as they'd promised. Now, with just a week left until the wedding, the reality is sinking in. This entire situation is going to leave a massive dent in our savings. We're facing years of living extremely frugally just to recover from this. What makes it even worse is that, at this point, there's no going back. Invitations have been sent, vendors have been booked, and everything has already been paid for. Even if we wanted to cancel, refunds aren't an option, so it would just be throwing more money away. The most frustrating part is how avoidable this disaster could have been if my parents had just been honest with me. They had months to come clean and tell me they didn't have the money, but instead they chose to stay silent. To them, their pride was apparently more important than being upfront about the situation. If they'd been honest from the beginning, I would have planned a smaller, more modest wedding that fit within my personal budget. No one would have been hurt. But instead, they let this charade go on until 3 days ago, when they finally realized they had to tell me the truth. They called my fiancé and me over for dinner and casually dropped the bombshell during dessert, expecting us to take it in stride. Their reasoning: since we'd already paid for everything, we could obviously afford it. I tried explaining to them that we'd only paid up front with the understanding that we'd be reimbursed, and now we had nothing left for the immediate future. But they didn't seem to grasp the gravity of what they'd done. They kept brushing off my concerns, insisting everything would be fine and we were worrying for no reason. Then came the real kicker, where my wedding fund had gone. As you've probably guessed, they spent it all on my sister Lucy's failing business. Lucy's business, unsurprisingly, hasn't been doing well. Her designs aren't innovative, and she lacks even basic business sense. My parents admitted that they'd been funding her venture for months, trying to keep it afloat. At some point, without even realizing it, or so they claim, they'd used up the entirety of my wedding fund to keep her business running. What's worse is that my fiancé and I had already been engaged for a couple of months by that point, and they had actively reassured me that the fund was intact and ready to go. They told me that backing out of their promise would have been embarrassing for them, so they stayed silent. Now they suddenly felt compelled to be honest when it was far too late. And unbelievably, they genuinely thought that their belated confession would somehow make everything okay. They were speaking to me as if this whole situation was no big deal, casually brushing it off as if I was just supposed to be understanding. At that moment, I realized there was no point in trying to reason with them anymore. So I smiled and told them it was fine. My fiancé looked a bit taken aback, but he didn't say anything. I think he understood that I had a plan and knew what I was doing. We left as quickly as we could, and as soon as we were in the car, I told him that I wasn't going to let my parents off the hook this time. In the past, I had always chosen to overlook their behavior because at the end of the day they were still my parents and I didn't want to hurt them or cut ties. But now it was clear that when it came to Lucy, they were willing to hurt anyone, even me. I was done letting things slide. When we got home, I made a post on all my social media platforms calling my parents out for what they had done. I didn't hold back. Years of pent-up frustration and anger poured out of me as I detailed every part of what had happened. It felt cathartic, like a weight I'd been carrying for years was finally being lifted. Within hours, people started reaching out to me. Some sent messages of comfort, while others even offered to help financially. The support was overwhelming, and it became clear that almost everyone who saw the post was upset with my parents. Many of them knew Lucy personally and were aware of how ill-equipped she was to run a business. The fact that my parents had used my wedding fund to prop up her failing venture, while making empty promises to me, infuriated everyone. I knew my parents or Lucy would try to contact me after seeing the post, so I blocked them in advance. For 2 days I didn't hear a word from them, until today. Their lawyer called me to issue a warning. He said I needed to take the post down immediately or face a lawsuit. My parents, he explained, claimed I had caused them severe emotional distress and tarnished their reputation, and if I didn't comply, they would sue me for defamation. He told me this was my one chance to avoid legal action. I was stunned that they would go so far as to involve a lawyer and threaten me like this. Furious, I unblocked my parents and called them, ready to give them a piece of my mind. But things didn't go as I expected. When I called my dad's phone, my mom answered instead. Before I could say a word, she launched into a cold and emotionless speech. She told me that my post had humiliated them on a public platform, something they had never expected me to do. She claimed it was a low blow, and accused me of being disloyal to my family. Then she dropped the bombshell. My dad had suffered a heart attack after reading the post. She blamed me entirely, saying that if I had such strong feelings about what they had done, I should have confronted them face to face instead of pretending everything was fine and then airing our dirty laundry online for sympathy. She made it sound like I had maliciously orchestrated this whole thing to hurt them. I was left speechless, unable to process the mix of anger, guilt, and disbelief her words brought on. I was in complete shock when I found out that everything about my dad's supposed heart attack had been a lie. My parents had made it all up to manipulate me into apologizing publicly. At first, I couldn't believe they would stoop to such a level. But after confirming the truth, I felt both angry and relieved. Angry because they had tried to guilt-trip me into silence, and relieved because my dad was in fact perfectly fine. It all started after my mom's phone call, where she blamed me for causing my dad's alleged heart attack. I had been racked with guilt ever since, questioning whether my actions had gone too far. Even though I didn't feel like I owed them a public apology, I took down my post temporarily while I tried to get more information about his condition. I repeatedly tried reaching out to my mom over the next couple of days, but she ignored all my calls and messages. Finally, last evening, after trying to call her 3 times in a row, she sent me a curt message. "Until you apologize publicly, There's nothing more your father or I have to say to you. I tried to argue with her over text, but she didn't respond. The whole situation left me feeling desperate for answers. That's when I remembered my dad's physician. Let's call him Uncle Ron. He's not just my dad's doctor but also an old family friend. I figured if anyone knew the truth about my dad's health, it would be him. So I decided to call him even though it felt awkward and intrusive. As soon as Uncle Ron picked up, I didn't give him a chance to say anything before launching into a string of questions. I asked about my dad's condition, how serious the heart attack had been, whether he was still in the hospital, or if he was recovering at home. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, Uncle Ron sounded utterly confused. "Heart attack," he said, his tone puzzled. "What are you talking about? Your dad's perfectly fine. In fact, we just had dinner and drinks the other night." I froze, my mind racing. "Are you sure?" I asked, still trying to process what I was hearing. "Yes, I'm positive," Uncle Ron replied. "I've seen him recently and he's in great health. Where are you getting this from?" Hearing this, everything started to click. My parents had lied to me about the heart attack. They had gone to such extreme lengths to manipulate me into feeling guilty and taking down my post. I couldn't believe how far they were willing to go to protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. After thanking Uncle Ron and hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a while, trying to absorb everything. My guilt evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal and anger. How could they lie about something as serious as a heart attack? What kind of people would weaponize a fake medical emergency to silence their own child? I wasted no time putting the post back up. This time I added an update, explaining the situation and revealing the truth about their fabricated heart attack. I made it clear that their attempt to manipulate me had failed, and that I wasn't going to back down. For now, I've blocked them again, and I'm taking a step back to focus on my own well-being. The lies and manipulation were the final straw. I don't know what's next for my relationship with them, but I do know one thing. I refuse to let them control me or my life any longer. They might have thought they could use guilt to silence me, but I'm done playing their games. Even if my dad had genuinely suffered a heart attack, he surely would have mentioned it to Uncle Ron, his longtime physician and family friend. But Uncle Ron was adamant. My dad was in perfect health. He had even met my dad recently for dinner and drinks. Still, I couldn't shake the confusion and frustration. I had to see for myself. Despite my wedding being the next day and a busy morning plan to check into the hotel, I decided to drive to my parents' house. It wasn't an easy decision. I had been avoiding the trip partly because of all the last-minute wedding preparations and partly because I was scared of confronting my dad in a bad state if Uncle Ron was somehow wrong. But after our conversation, I felt I owed it to myself to confirm the truth. When I arrived and rang the doorbell, my mom initially refused to open the door. She shouted through the door, accusing me of being intrusive and disrespectful. I wasn't having it. I told her I wasn't leaving until I saw my dad with my own eyes. Eventually, after my persistence, she reluctantly opened the door, looking visibly irritated. As soon as I walked in, I saw my dad in the bedroom, perfectly healthy, sipping wine while working on his laptop. My heart sank and boiled at the same time. He immediately started fumbling for excuses, claiming that he had recovered quickly and could drink now. My mom tried to spin the story too, saying it was disgusting of me to come all the way just to harass them. But their tone, their defensiveness, it all confirmed what I had suspected. They had been lying the entire time. Disgusted and unable to process my anger, I walked out without saying another word. When I got back home, I unarchived the social media post I had made earlier. It felt like the only way to regain control after all their manipulation. The wedding fund incident had already crushed any illusion of trust one had in my parents. I had expected little from them after that, but lying about something as serious as a heart attack, just to guilt me into compliance, was beyond anything I could have imagined. It was vile and inexcusable. They had stooped to a new low, all for the sake of protecting their reputation and forcing me to apologize publicly. I tried to rationalize their behavior, thinking about how they had always prioritized Lucy over me. But even that didn't soften the blow. They had always been overly concerned with appearances, going to any lengths to maintain their image, but this was a step too far. They had humiliated me, lied to me, and used their daughter's memory to manipulate me, and I was done. I had always tried to be a good daughter despite the blatant favoritism, but now I realized the effort was wasted. After reposting my message online, I sat down with my fiancé and told him everything. He comforted me as best he could and reminded me that our focus should now be on the wedding. Together, we agreed to set my parents aside for the time being and concentrate on the happy day ahead. We checked into the hotel this morning, and many of our guests have already arrived. The entire evening has been spent entertaining friends and family, and for a few hours, I've been able to put my parents and their lies out of my mind. My fiancé has been my rock through all of this, and being surrounded by people who truly care about us has been a refreshing change. Tomorrow, I'm marrying the love of my life, and I refuse to let my parents' toxic behavior ruin this milestone for us. Their lies and manipulation no longer have power over me. Right now, my focus is on building a new life. A life filled with honesty, love, and people who genuinely support me. Now that my fiancé is fast asleep and I'm alone in my room, I feel the need to vent. I don't want to carry any of this emotional weight into tomorrow because tomorrow is our day. The day I've been dreaming of for months. Whatever worries I have about life, finances, or family drama can wait until the day after. Tomorrow is going to be about me, my fiancé, and the start of our life together. Writing this all out feels cathartic, like I'm clearing my mind to fully embrace the joy of my wedding day. Sure, the circumstances leading up to our wedding haven't been ideal. We've had more than our share of hurdles, and there's still so much to figure out about our future. But as I sit here, I find comfort in the knowledge that I'll be facing all of it with someone who truly loves me. Somehow that makes the road ahead feel a little less daunting. Update. Hi everyone. I got married 3 days ago, and it was one of the best days of my life. As I mentioned before, the wedding was planned to be extravagant, with a large guest list and every detail carefully thought out. Despite the drama surrounding it, everything went off without a hitch. Even though many of the guests were aware of my social media post about my parents, nobody made the day about that. They were respectful and didn't bring up my parents or my sister's absence. It wasn't awkward at all, and for that I'm incredibly grateful. Instead, the day was filled with love, laughter, and joy, exactly as I had hoped it would be. But the best part of the wedding, aside from marrying the love of my life, was the surprise wedding gift from my relatives. While I had a registry, it turns out that none of them followed it. For once, I'm thrilled that a bride's guests didn't stick to the registry. Instead of traditional gifts, my relatives pooled their money together and gave me a check for a substantial amount, enough to cover the entire cost of the wedding. I was overwhelmed by their generosity. Coming from a generally well-off family, it might not have been a huge deal for many of them, but the gesture itself was priceless. It wasn't just about the money. It was the love and care they showed me, especially during such a difficult time. Both my husband and I were moved to tears by their kindness. Thanks to their support, I don't have to worry about the financial strain we've been dreading. It didn't feel like charity either. It felt like genuine love and solidarity. That sense of being cared for is irreplaceable, and it's something I'll treasure forever. I'm also relieved that my parents and Lucy didn't attempt to crash the wedding. I'd been nervous about the possibility and had even hired extra security at the venue just in case. Thankfully, my fears were unfounded. As it turns out, they were on a family beach vacation during the wedding. Looking back, I couldn't have asked for a better wedding day. Everything turned out beautifully, and I feel incredibly lucky to have such an amazing husband and supportive people around me. The future feels brighter now, and I'm ready to embrace it fully. Thank you to everyone who's been following my story and supporting me through this. Your kindness and advice have meant the world.